Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you at the Diplomatic Academy, and it's a special honor and pleasure to welcome the President of the Republic of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani-Sadriu. Welcome. Madam Osmani-Sadriu is not for the first time in contact with us here at the Diplomatic Academy. She used to be available, I might say, for our students of the second-year master degree program when we visited Kosovo, Pristina, every year. And we had very good discussions about civil society in Kosovo, about democratic development, about women's rights and other things. And I had the feeling that you are a civil society activist yourself, not only a politician. And I understand that this is certainly one of the reasons why you have been elected this April also to become President of the Republic of Kosovo. The background of the President is a legal studies background. She studied at the University of Pristina and then master's and doctoral program, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And she used to lecture a lot. But obviously it was not about lecturing when you live in Kosovo alone. You have to do political work. And she was from a very early age on involved in the development of the constitution of Kosovo, advising presidents and other politicians before she decided, after a long term in parliament, if I may say so, you're so young, but it was a long time in parliament, also to run for offices, highest offices in Kosovo. And she actually even founded a new party. And the party has the name in English, Dare to Do Something, I guess is the best translation. Dare to do something. The right thing. Dare to do the right thing, yeah. And more than 300,000 voters in Kosovo supported her when she ran for parliament. It's a pleasure to have you here and to discuss issues of international affairs, discuss the issue of how to strengthen Kosovo's statehood, what are the challenges and what are the success stories after now it's more than 12 years of independence. One can say it is certainly a success that more than 100 countries have recognized Kosovo already. Austria among the first, as we all know, to do that. Madam President, I think I can say that you are on a fairly home ground here, a home pitch in Vienna and at the Diplomatic Academy. So I would ask you to start the talk with a presentation of how you see the successes and challenges. And I might say we are also on live stream. So when you have questions, the President has accepted to discuss them, but also there may be questions coming from the live stream, which is at the moment on. So welcome again, and Madam President, I ask you for your word.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Certainly a great pleasure to be talking to the Vienna Diplomatic Academy, although this time in Vienna at its home and not in Pristina, as we are used to. During the many visits you and your students have had, always really a great honor to be talking to all of you. There's a very important topic that I will be discussing with everyone today, at least important for the lives of the people that I represent, the people of the Republic of Kosovo, but I think also extremely important in terms of international law and international affairs. It's been a very long and bumpy and challenging road for my country. And while many people around the world, including those that deal with diplomacy, like to talk about what has happened in the near future, I try to remind everyone that there is a context. There is a context that brought us to this date. There is a very long struggle for Kosovo's freedom and independence, which entailed and included the sacrifice of many generations before myself and my colleagues. And that is extremely important to understand. The context is always important for each and every story including in politics and diplomacy. So quite a lot of people understand and know from the news what happened during 1998, 1999, because there was a horrendous war that was caused by the Milosevic regime against the innocent civilians in Kosovo, a continuation of their atrocities in Bosnia, Croatia, and elsewhere. But very few people know what happened before that. Since 1989, when Milosevic rose to power, and with lots of discrimination even beforehand, but especially since 1989, an apartheid-like system was established in Kosovo. So practically, if you did not belong to the Serb community, you were not allowed to get education, you were not allowed to go to school, you were not allowed to have a job. So all of our parents were kicked out of our jobs. You were not allowed to have any of the civilian, political, or cultural rights that one has according to a constitution or based on international treaties that at that time were signed and ratified by former Yugoslavia. So we grew up, myself and all of my colleagues that you see here, in a parallel system of education established by our late President Ibrahim Rugova, which meant that we saw education as a tool of national survival. We went into the so-called home schools, home turned into schools, because we were kicked out of our original schools. And going to school meant that not just the professors, but also the kids were endangering their lives. For that reason, it becomes a mission, not just for the parents who understand what's going on, not just for the professors who understand what's going on, but for the little kid that is going on his or her first or second grade to really do their best, to excel at school. Because by exercising your right to education, which was being denied, you were also helping your country struggle for freedom and independence. So until 1998, 1999, we were living under massive discrimination. People were killed. It was a silent ethnic cleansing that was happening, and so many attacks just based on ethnic and nationality background against Albanians, but also sometimes against Bosnian Turks and Roma and others who lived in Kosovo. So to put it shortly, we went through a very dark history. And we survived because of our people's resilience and sacrifice and resistance, but at the same time because we had friends by our side. We had the democratic world by our side. We had countries like Austria, other members of the European Union and other European countries. We had the United States of America and other powerful nations who decided to say no to the Serb genocide that was being exercised on Kosovo soil. And 22 years ago, when NATO intervened and later on entered Kosovo in June 1999, was the moment that we call the Day of Liberation, because finally an end was put to human atrocities, to crime against humanity, war crimes, and genocide that was being committed by the Milosevic regime with a very clear intention to exterminate a group of people that were not like him. And these were very clearly exercised in so many of the massacres around Kosovo. I am talking about this because I strongly believe that not just in Kosovo, but everywhere around the world, there's one story we hear from the victims, the survivors, and their families, and that is we cannot move on to the next chapter unless we really read, understand, and remember and learn from the chapter that is in front of us. We cannot just pass a chapter and pretend as if nothing happened, because a lot has happened to the people that I represent. And I represent a people that needs to heal from the deep wounds that were caused by the war. A people that never had the chance to heal. Which takes us to the situation today. The Republic of Kosovo represents an outstanding potential. It is the home to the youngest population in Europe in terms of age, a thriving society, educated, that speaks so many languages, very much tech-savvy, they're thriving in the IT sector, a potential for the country, which I do hope that Austria and other nations around the world will see. And as institutions representing the people, we are really trying to convince the rest of the world that it's been 22 years after the war. We should not be seen as a burden, but as a potential right now. Because truly, the people of Kosovo are a potential. And for that reason, we try to make sure that wherever we go, we explain that bilateral relations need to move on from simply not talking just about diplomacy and politics, but we need to move on with economic development, investment, cooperation in the IT sector, cooperation on the green agenda, tourism, and education, in particularly with Austria, since we have a history of long-term cooperation. And while we do tackle all of these domestic issues, because that's what the people of Kosovo care about right now, creating new jobs and delivering justice for all, we of course also understand that the globe's not going to wait for us until we finish and tackle all of the domestic problems. So foreign policy, international relations, be it bilateral relations with countries or our multilateral agenda, also remain as priorities, and in which I, as president, in cooperation with the government, are very much focused on. But we need to understand that while the process of the dialogue with Serbia is an important process, Serbia is not the only country out there in the globe. We seek to have good bilateral relations with every country, and for that reason we should not reduce our foreign policy only to what's going on in the dialogue with Serbia, which is why I, as president, am doing this tour of visiting many countries in Europe and outside of Europe to make sure that these bilateral relations are strengthened, they are enhanced, and they can flourish on certain areas of common interest. It is a very challenging road, I have to say, as Kosovo's statehood has been. I was involved in the very first steps when the negotiations for the final status of Kosovo were taking place, many of the meetings here in Vienna. And since then, when Kosovo made a large number of concessions so that finally the final package could be independence for Kosovo, the hurdles in the way did not stop. While, of course, we used to mention this very much sui generis path that Kosovo had to take in terms of convincing countries bilaterally to recognize us, instead of simply becoming a member of the UN and then everyone recognizes you. It is very important to recognize something that the International Court of Justice has also stipulated. Kosovo's independence is just like the independence of the other countries that are members of the UN. It is based on the will of its people. And that's why the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo was never considered as an act of the institutions. It was considered what it really was politically, but also confirmed legally, an act of the will of the people, because it represented the will of the people, a will that existed for decades and was confirmed on the 17th of February 2008. And later on, of course, one of the biggest legal challenges we had was in front of the International Court of Justice, as I mentioned, a court which ruled on an advisory opinion that this Declaration of Independence is not in contradiction to international law. And right after that, there was quite a lot of international interest to have Kosovo and Serbia sit down and talk. But at that time, a UN General Assembly resolution that was adopted to bring the process under the auspices of the European Union was intended to help both parties, in this case Kosovo and Serbia, discuss on an equal footing on issues that truly matter to the lives of the citizens that we represent. It was never intended to discuss the status of Kosovo, because that was decided once and for all on the 17th of February 2008. Nevertheless, Serbia has been abusing the process of the dialogue to convince non-recognizing countries that, according to them, the dialogue is about the status. But it is not, despite of attempts by Serbia and its allies to make the dialogue about Kosovo's borders a very dangerous adventure, or make the dialogue with Kosovo about Kosovo's internal regulation, which would create another Bosnia in our region, and absolutely a very dangerous idea that would destabilize the entire region. As far as we are concerned, this process is between two equal parties where we, as neighbors, discuss about how to remove trade barriers. We discuss about the fate of the missing people, which is an extremely important topic to us. Almost 2,000 people are still missing from the latest war in Kosovo, and we need Serbia to give information from their archives and to open the mass graves so that almost 2,000 families can have their beloveds back home, and they can have a place where to lay a flower when they want to remember their loved ones. So these are the kind of topics that, if resolved, would really give a great incentive and a positive incentive to the entire process. It would also increase the support for the process from the people who should be the end beneficiaries of this. So while these challenges are persisting, both when it comes to gaining more recognitions as well as membership in international organizations, I am very confident that Kosovo's future is bright. We have to be very patient on moving forward, but at the same time extremely persistent. If I go to regional roundtables and I'm told that I should be not talking about Kosovo's recognition, my answer is, I cannot give up on my country's right to exist, and I will not give up on my people's right to be free and independent. So if I don't say that, there's no reason for me to be there, because that is why I am there. The reason why I'm sitting on a round table with other presidents on a regional meeting is because I'm the president of the independent and sovereign Kosovo. And for that reason, giving up on our very inherent right, which is based on the will of the people, means giving up on practically everything that we stand for and everything that we fought for. So you will be hearing us speak up about what is rightful. And instead of seeing this as a provocation, which is what Serbia calls it, it should see it as the inevitable reality which they will have to recognize, because Kosovo's independence is absolutely irreversible. We are here to stay. We're not in Austria. Obviously, I'm going back home, but Kosovo is here to stay as an independent and sovereign country. There is absolutely no negotiation or dialogue that will be able to contest that, no matter the aims of Serbia under lots of Russian influence. So these challenges will remain. We will continue to put lots of effort into convincing countries about the right of Kosovo to be recognized as an independent country. And when it comes to international organizations, it's even more important, because as I explained today in previous meetings, that is not just about strengthening Kosovo's statehood. Becoming a member of an international organization means increasing the quality of life for all the citizens that live in Kosovo, be it Albanian, Serb, Roma, Turks, Bosnian, or others. Let's say the WHO. If we're a member of the WHO, that increases the standards of health in our country. If we're a member of UNESCO, it increases the standards of protection for cultural heritage. If we're a member of Interpol, it increases cross-border cooperation in fighting crime. And if we're a member of the Council of Europe, it increases the level of human rights protection, because our citizens would finally have the right to approach the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, whenever rights have been violated by public institutions in Kosovo. So these are not just about having a seat at the table. These are also about having our citizens' voices heard and having a much higher quality of life for each and every one of them. So to have Serbia, and of course their ally, Russia, blocking our membership only shows how little they care about the minority communities living in Kosovo, but only care about grasping territories, which has been their long-time intention. Perhaps to conclude, so that I can leave space to questions and a further discussion with the ambassador, following the 14th of February elections in Kosovo and a set of institutions with quite a high trust from the people of Kosovo, I can only say that we really want to work together with Austria, with members of the European Union, the United States, and other countries to strengthen Kosovo's statehood, but also find ways to open new chapters of cooperation in trade, economy, and other areas. Because Kosovo's potential is out there. And as a country, as I mentioned, with the youngest population in Europe, I believe that there are great opportunities ahead for both ourselves as well as the countries that we want to work for. Rule of law is a priority because we see that as a precondition to development in every other area, be it to attract foreign investors or to invest more in education and health as the main areas for investment in human capital and a precondition for sustainable economic development. And of course, our strategic priorities will remain membership in the European Union and NATO, which means that a number of extremely important reforms will need to be carried out. We count on the support of our friends, but at the same time, we're not asking for a shortcut. We're asking for a merit-based process. And unfortunately, in the case of visa liberalization, this has not happened. Kosovo has delivered more than 3 years ago, has fulfilled more than double the amount of criteria as asked by the European Commission, and now the process is blocked because of domestic political considerations of very few member states, unfortunately. So the EU has to deliver, it has to keep its promise, because it's also an issue of credibility. And the sooner it does that, I think the better it will be for every other process in which the EU is involved. But we do see the future in the European Union. We have never looked elsewhere. We have never looked for other choices or options. We never seek to sit at 2 chairs at once. We know where we belong. We know where we have always belonged, and that is in Europe as part of the European Union. And for that reason, I really do hope that we will have you all by our side to support this important journey for the people of Kosovo so that we can also join Austria at the table in the European Union. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam President, for an inspiring speech. We did not expect less from you after what we know from our trips to Pristina. And it's very good that you spoke so much about recognition being something natural, something that one shouldn't have to fight for because it's the will of the people of Kosovo. But what do you say to those 5 countries in the European Union which, for specific reasons, say, no, that's not natural. That's something we don't want because of Catalonia, because of I don't know what happens. So what are the arguments you are using and you can use to convince these 5 EU member countries who are still not doing what we think they should do?
Thank you for pointing that out. All of these 5 countries are extremely important for our journey ahead in the European Union. So in the case of the EU non-recognizers, this is not just about bilateral recognition. It's also about European integration path. We are working closely with each and every one of them. I have to confess with some is much more difficult than with some others. There are a couple of arguments that we have been mentioning publicly, and then there are others that, of course, we mention in closed meetings as well. But let me start by mentioning I think, the most important one. What happened against the people of Kosovo, as I said earlier, was horrendous crimes. Serbia abused the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty to violate and commit gross violations of human rights against the people who were living in that territory. So of course, we also have to talk about the people of Kosovo using self-determination in this case as a remedy because of the gross violations of human rights that were committed against us. Spain did not commit genocide against the people of Catalonia. I'm really surprised sometimes why do they want to put themselves, and I'm not talking only about Spain, but I'm talking about non-recognizers generally, why would they want to compare themselves with the Serbia and Yugoslavia of Milosevic? They did not commit the kind of crimes that Milosevic and their regime committed against Kosovo. If I remember correctly, when Canada recognized Kosovo, they said, we are recognizing Kosovo precisely because it is entirely different from Quebec, because we never committed these kind of crimes against the people of Quebec. And of course, differences are not only in this area, also political considerations, because in the case of Kosovo, there's been a set of negotiations for the final status where, if I may quote the late Mr. Rohan, no stone was left unturned twice. Everything was tried to find a mutually agreeable solution. Thirdly, there was a UN Security Council resolution for Kosovo, a resolution that does not exist for these other parts of the world that are seen as problematic, which envisaged that Resolution 1244, with the UN military and civilian sort of protectorate, administration, in fact, was used only as a temporary measure, according to that resolution, until the final status would be determined. According to the ICJ, the moment when the final status was determined, which was the 17th of February 2008, the legal regime of Resolution 1244 cannot be the legal regime towards which you weigh upon and evaluate the actions of the new institutions that stem after the Declaration of Independence, which of course is taking me to the legal arguments. I think both in the sense of how Kosovo got to its independence, as well as the basic principles of international law related to the right to self-determination, but also the specifics of its path that led to the Declaration of Independence are nowhere similar to the territories to which some are trying to compare us to. And finally, it's the argument of reality. Kosovo is not going back. Every country in Europe knows that. It's a one-way ticket. Kosovo's independence is a one-way ticket. And for that reason, the sooner this reality is accepted, the better for the peace and stability of the entire region. And the more EU, including the 5 non-recognizers, are comparing, they would be supporting Kosovo's independence, the more they would be supporting our path towards European integration, which means more stability for the Western Balkans and more stability for the entire European continent. Just to clarify once again, when I say that they should not compare themselves to the Milosevic regime, I'm not saying that there has been any statement in that sense, but I don't think the situation in Kosovo, what happened to the people of Kosovo, can in any way be compared to the situation in any of the 5 non-recognizers. And I think the argument that sometimes we hear from some politicians that Kosovo's independence is not in line with international law has been thrown away once and forever. In July 2010, when the ICJ ruled out that no provision of international law has been violated in the case.
This is an advisory opinion, as you know.
Which was, of course, I know. I represented Kosovo in that case. So it is an advisory opinion because Serbia asked for the advisory opinion. But as you know, it's also a principle that UN members should respect, including these advisory opinions. But I think the answer would be the same even if it had been a contentious case, but Serbia did not want to raise a contentious case for reasons we both know. Nevertheless, the answer is there. If anyone wanted an answer from the World Court, it is all there in that 44-page opinion on why Kosovo's independence is in line with international law. And it takes us all back to one basic principle, to the will of the people.
Yes. Your answer was much stronger than the answer I got from President Taci when he was in this room some 2 years ago, I think. So I'm very happy to hear that answer. But sometimes these issues of state building, recognition, are also deal-making. And I'm just mentioning the case of Israel. Someone could say this was a deal between Kosovo accepting to have the representation in Jerusalem, for Israel accepting the independence of Kosovo. What would you answer?
I would answer that Kosovo's recognition by every country around the globe is extremely important. And it was also important that we got the recognition from Israel in that sense. Kosovo's diplomacy when it comes to recognition has never been about the deal-making. It was about explaining how this was the right path forward given the sacrifice of the people of Kosovo, which happened for a very long time, not just our generation. I would definitely not call it a deal, no matter how it is interpreted sometimes. It is Kosovo striving to get as many recognitions as possible. And I think it should be respected as such. It was part of the Washington commitments that were signed in September last year. So it will be a year very soon since that deal was signed. And I think that was one of the good parts of that agreement, the mutual recognition.
You're not happy with all parts of this Trump agreement from September?
Well, whoever reads it would obviously see there a provision which, of course, my American friends know that I've expressed very often in meetings with them as well as in public, which I thought was not a good precedent set by our previous prime minister, which was Kosovo's moratorium on recognitions and moratorium on, in fact, membership in international organizations, because it is a requirement under our constitution and a requirement in our Declaration of Independence that we should strive for recognition and strive for membership in international organizations. So to put a moratorium on it, to suspend it, I thought it was not a good idea, but it is going to expire this September because it was only for a year. So yeah. I think we will be fine onwards.
When someone would ask me what changed with the new prime minister, new president, I would say the strong commitment to using recognition as your main objective, because this is what you're striving after. Sometimes obviously difficult. The last meeting in Brussels, your prime minister spoke about recognition, and President Vučić didn't want to hear even the word. So what is the way forward, really? It's certainly, we support you saying that you are on the right path with what you say, but if you don't get the response from a majority of the international community and your neighbor Serbia, it's going to be difficult.
Well, I think the majority of the international community, at least the majority of the democratic nations around the world, have already responded to Kosovo's request for recognition. We know what the majority believes. Now, that majority, I believe, should help us convince the minority of countries that are still denying that reality. Our prime minister did his job when he said that he's asking for Serbia to recognize Kosovo. Even the President of the United States, President Biden, clearly calls this a process that should be centered on mutual recognition. So we should call it by its name, if it's a process centered around mutual recognition. Otherwise, it will have no meaning because Serbia will simply procrastinate, as it has done in these 10 years of dialogue, by signing agreements and not implementing most of them in practice. As you know very well, and everyone that has experience in the region, with Serbia you have two sets of processes. One, you have to convince them to sign, and the second, you have to convince them to implement. And the second, more often, is more difficult than the first one, because they do not honor their deals. It is unfortunate for our region, but that is the truth. For that reason, we now need to move on to what truly matters, and that is the mutual recognition. Otherwise, we're going to spend another 10 years talking about stickers on registration plates. But look, I come from Mitrovica, a city in North Kosovo. If you ask both Serbs living in the north and Albanians living in the south how this 10-year process has changed their life for the better, very few will give a positive answer. We are trying to make this process about the people. They have to be the end beneficiaries. It should not be about two politicians taking a set of pictures and calling themselves historic leaders. It should be about what are the people benefiting from the deal that is signed at the table. And the deal will be sustainable and implementable if it's about mutual recognition. Anything short of that will be just, passing from one phase to another where Serbia is abusing the process to convince countries to either de-recognize or to postpone their decision on recognitions, telling them that it's about the status, when actually the process is not about the status. But I think still it's very important that we push forward issues such as shedding light on the fate of the missing persons, because this is a very deep wound among our people, and it would really help if we can, of course, find their whereabouts, but it will take a Serbia that is committed to human rights, a Serbia that tackles this as a humanitarian issue, not as a political issue.
Yeah, but this in the Balkans, this is very difficult to talk about the past. You know it better than I do.
Not everywhere in the Balkans, I must say.
In some parts of it, it's traditionally not so easy. And the Serbs are saying, what are you doing to our cultural heritage in Kosovo and things like that? So there is always both sides are also saying that the past, which should actually bring us together, is dividing us.
Well, I would like to invite every one of you to come and visit the cultural heritage of Kosovo, to visit every single piece of our heritage, to see with your own eyes the protection that they are getting. If you talk to KFOR, go and ask the Austrian KFOR, for example, if there are any security concerns surrounding those buildings. There are none. There hasn't been a cultural heritage or church-related incident in Kosovo in the past 10 years. None at all. So there are no reasons to call something that it's not a problem. Quite the opposite. We have shown all the political willingness to protect that cultural heritage because we cherish diversity. We cherish all of the heritage of Kosovo. And that is Kosovo's heritage because we cherish all of our people, no matter their nationality, no matter their religious background. Our security institutions are doing their utmost to protect them all. And right now there is only one where KFOR is situated. Every other church is protected by Kosovo police, and there are still no incidents, which shows that the reality is the opposite to what Serbia is saying, but confirm it for yourselves. You can come and see it with your own eyes and talk to the Austrians that are surrounding the church and ask them if that is true or not. We will be doing our utmost to protect them, not because Serbia is saying that, but because it's in the interest of the people that we represent, and we represent them all, no matter their ethnical, religious, or cultural background. So let me be very frank. I cannot take tendencies for moral equivalencies between what the Milosevic regime did to the people of Kosovo, or Bosnia, or cases of Croatia, and what some incidents that might have happened after the war mean, that were individual, not state-sponsored, not representative of the will of the people of Kosovo. What Serbia did in Kosovo was a state-sponsored apparatus action, state-sponsored actions. They were not just a bunch of paramilitaries acting on their own free will. It was the state committing the crimes, therefore showing their own intention towards the people of Kosovo. And for that reason, I think we can move forward if we recognize this context, if we recognize that truth. Because as you know, tendencies of history revisionism are all over. And unfortunately, sometimes they're winning. And that's why it is, I think, beyond politics. It's our moral duty as human beings to fight these tendencies of history revisionism.
That's a huge topic. I think about Putin actually at this very moment. Yeah. I would like to open the floor actually. I have already 2 questions from the internet, and I read you the first question. Madam President, thank you for your inspiring speech. I would have a question regarding the most promising current or near future legal or policy steps that will advance and strengthen Kosovo's statehood from a national or international viewpoint.
Well, we certainly will try to focus a lot more, as I said, on a policy approach where Kosovo's foreign policy is not reduced to only the dialogue with Serbia. Too much of the energy of previous institutions was taken only from this process, thereby leaving very little space to either deal with bilateral recognitions or enhancing cooperation and relations with those who have already recognized. So, of course, the dialogue is one part of it, but it's not the entire picture. We will focus a lot on creating these relations with other countries so that support that Kosovo received in the very few years after independence can now kind of continue in order to strengthen Kosovo's statehood. In terms of membership into international organizations, right now our institutions are working in an evaluation procedure on what would be some of the most important organizations and which would be the strong European countries, let's say if we're talking about a European organization or internationally, that could take a leadership role in promoting our membership, because as a small country, we know that this cannot happen all by ourselves. It will really take lots of support, international support. And very soon we will be able to publicly talk about what will be the top international organizations where we will seek membership. I did mention some of them, obviously, but in terms of prioritizing them, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working right now on a proposal that will later on be discussed with me as president and other interlocutors to see how we move forward in this sense. But I think it's about the approach. Sometimes you don't necessarily change the organizations where you apply, but you must change the strategy, you must change the approach that you take in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I have a second question. Dear Madam President, do you believe that the role of the US under President Biden will change and have a much greater impact on the dialogue between the Republic of Kosovo and Serbia? What do you think about the way the European Union is handling the dialogue?
So 2 questions there.
Yeah.
On the United States, I already see an interest that is very positive, very respectful of Kosovo's position. The fact that President Biden, I think he wrote a letter once on the 17th of February and then again after I was elected, in both letters he is openly speaking about mutual recognition as the final solution in the dialogue process only shows, first of all, the great knowledge that he has about our region. Secondly, the fact that he knows what is the right path for sustainable peace in our region. And thirdly, it shows that he has the the willingness to have this transatlantic cooperation with the European Union for all of the issues in the Western Balkans, not just the dialogue with Kosovo and Serbia. So I do count a lot on the support of the Biden administration. I've had the opportunity to meet President Biden many times when he was not president, but when he was vice president and a senator beforehand, and always saw the great connection he feels for Kosovo and the people of Kosovo. He was our voice for so many years during the 90s when we were under oppression and victims of the Milosevic aggression. He was speaking loud and clear to end that aggression, and I think as one of the greatest supporters of Kosovo, he will never forget the context that I was talking about, because he understands where we come from and what really is important for our region. We are working closely, obviously, with everyone at the State Department as well as the White House to make sure that we express our views, we inform them what our positions are and why we have those positions. It's very important that we believe in the power of arguments in all this, these relations. When it comes to the European Union, as you know, the process is led by the EU. I have to say that we were very discontent with the fact that the EU institutions, not member states, the institutions had allowed for the border changes ideas to become part of the table. It was very unfortunate, but of course, in Kosovo, we fought it really hardly, and we worked really hard with individual member states to make sure that they are convinced this is a dangerous adventure. So thankfully, that's not on the table anymore. The new special envoy, he speaks openly against these dangerous adventures, but of course, there are times where we have to speak openly about the necessity for an unbiased process, because an unbiased process where both parties are treated on an equal footing is extremely important for the success of the process and for its credibility. Now, it's been only one meeting, so I cannot give you a full evaluation of how I see the job of the new leaders of these institutions and the new special envoy. The first meeting was more of an introduction rather than an actual set of a dialogue. So it tried to set the new rules for the new chapter of the dialogue, but it will really depend on how it moves on. And we'll see how the 25th of July meeting moves on to have perhaps a full picture of how we see the role of the EU. We obviously think the EU as such is indispensable for all of us at the Western Balkans, and that it's important that the EU gives incentives to both parties, because there's this great misperception that Kosovo should be considered as a basket of goods where anyone can take anything that it likes. But Kosovo should not be the subject of the dialogue or treated as an object of the dialogue that you put on the table and you look at, okay, you take this, I take that, and how about we make a deal? We should not be the trading object. In fact, the European Union should use the incentives from within the EU for both parties so that they can make progress in the dialogue. So the final benefit should come from the EU, not from our territory, not from our functionality as a country, not from our internal regulation or principles as such. It should come from the EU, because that was the intention when the dialogue started. Both parties progress, you get carrots from the EU, not from Kosovo. We have no carrots to give. We want a functional country. We want a successful country that contributes to stability in the region, not the opposite. So that's why I think the 10 years should also be looked as a lessons learned process as well.
Yes, no, you're certainly right. The EU has more leverage on Serbia than it uses so far, especially in the process of integration. And there is there is still more that the EU can do
I agree.
to influence Serbia, absolutely. I have a lot of questions here, but I give also here the floor to the people here. Please.
Madam President, it's very nice to have you here. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm from the Applied Human Rights Master from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna and the European Master on Human Rights that is coming with me since 20 years, 120 people, students to Kosovo. And I've been cooperating for 30 years in different capacities with institutions in Kosovo. One was the Stability Pact as a member of Austrian Parliament. And my question is, what is your attitude concerning the regional cooperation? Because you say Serbia, and you are fully right, is at the moment sort of a dark chapter, and the chances are very, very low that a great move will happen. But are you looking for partnerships in the ex-Yugoslavian, former Yugoslav countries or republics to support you, knowing how difficult Bosnia and Herzegovina is, but still, do you see a potential there, and especially for economic cooperation, because you have been mentioning Kosovo has the youngest population in whole Europe, and there's as well a population for businesses, for economics, and so on. And the second thing is, you mentioned, for me, the biggest scandal within the European Commission, the allowance of visa liberalization for Kosovo people. I think it's simply unacceptable. It's so shameful for us Europeans, because as you rightly said, all conditions from Kosovo sides have been fulfilled. And I'm struggling when I see that my students or experts are not able to come to high-level meetings because embassies are so rigid and even bureaucratic. It's really unbearable. And where do you see the anchor to make a change? Because appeals are happening since 3 years. But who could support you here within the European Union and Commission, and how? Because we all are saying, my boss, Erhard Busek, who was the coordinator of the Stability Pact, he would end every speech or every single meeting with this appeal, and we would do it as well, all the directors and so on. But apparently this is not enough. What could be done? Because that is an obstacle for your development, for the young people, and for the whole region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I certainly see quite a lot of opportunities for regional cooperation. When I talk about European integration, I certainly mean that the entire region should move towards European integration, both as a geopolitical necessity and priority of the EU itself, but secondly, on a merit-based process based on the criteria that these countries have fulfilled, and it would contribute to the stability of the entire continent. But there are lots of regional initiatives out there, especially under the auspices of the Berlin process, which are bringing countries together in terms of infrastructural cooperation, tourism cooperation, digitalization, and the green agenda. So these are at least some of the areas where there is prospect of regional cooperation. But while lots of these pieces of papers are signed, we are getting so many, and it brings me back to talking about reality, because this is not about just showing political willingness on the paper, but also in action. There are so many non-tariff barriers that are put by Serbia to the goods from Kosovo. But to be honest, a little bit also from other countries in the region. So now we are talking individually to each and every one of them to see how these barriers can be removed so that there can be more trade cooperation. I do see the potential out there, and I think the common regional market documents that will be signed this July by the prime ministers of the countries of the region is also a beginning of a new chapter of cooperation in this area. It will also provide for the people of the region to move from one country to the other only with IDs, without passports, without visas. And I think that will enhance cooperation as well in many areas. So the potential is out there. You just need sometimes to look at businesses and how much they cooperate and not put politics as an obstacle to the business cooperation. For example, I forgot to mention previously with the non-recognizers, we have great business and trade cooperation with Greece. So yes, Greece did not recognize yet in terms of a formal recognition, but we do have excellent relations when it comes to cooperation, visits, including political and diplomatic visits, and we have a trade office there that is trying to help businesses cooperate with one another, and as you know, it's geographically very close by. We're trying to do the same with the non-recognizers, because I think even if the recognition will come later, it's very important that with these countries, we establish chapters of cooperation in culture, education, trade, and other areas as a way to soften their position until recognition comes. So I certainly see that with a closer region as possible. When it comes to visa liberalization, look, the European Commission has said for more than 3 years that we have fulfilled the criteria. The European Parliament has said twice with an overwhelming 2/3 majority that we have met the criteria. As I said earlier, it's about domestic politics of a few member states. What we will do is approach them, meet them, discuss any concerns that they might have, anything. But to be very frank, their concerns don't have anything to do with Kosovo, nothing. So it's very hard to find the right way forward. We have sought the help of other countries, and today the President of Austria said that he will personally engage with the leaders of the countries that are still hesitating. And they are very few, too, perhaps, right now. But I think we just need to really continue to raise our voice in favor of visa liberalization, but have a more proactive diplomacy as well, and more contacts and more help from friends until these remaining countries understand that this is not just an injustice, it's also putting the credibility of the EU down a lot, of the entire EU, not just of certain member states. Because next time, when any country is asked to deliver on something, the question will be, well, we will, but will you deliver? So it's something that I think it's worth to have all of the other EU member states work on, because it's also touching the credibility of all of the EU institutions, not just of these few countries. But we will work tirelessly. If they have anything to ask from us, we will gladly do that as well. But I mean, we have fulfilled all of the technical criteria, and this should be seen a technical process. That's what it was always aimed at, and it's really, hard to see countries in the Far East or Latin America benefiting from visa liberalization, but not Kosovo, which is at the heart of Europe.
Yeah, Madam President, you are held hostage for politics of emotions in some of the member countries of the European Union, which have to do with the right-wing politics there. We know we can easily analyze it, but it's very difficult to overcome these sort of domestic issues. But you're a politician, also in Kosovo, domestic issues always count. So it's, I have Ulrike Lunacek next on my list.
Thank you, Ulrike Lunacek. I've been rapporteur for Kosovo in the European Parliament for 8 years, so we've known each other for a long time. I'm very happy to have you here in this new position you have, and really think it's a very good fact for your country. I can easily follow up with the last question asked and the issue of visa liberalization, and not just that, because to me, for these 8 years, I worked closely with your republic. One of the things that made me very angry is the negative image that Kosovo, just the name, has in so many cabinets of ministers, of heads of state, and even of the public, and some media had still and had for a long time. And I think part of that is, it has to do with, all the refugees will come when we give them visa liberalization, has to do with corrupt criminal networks which exist maybe in Kosovo, but also in the region and even inside the EU, yeah, in many places. So, and I think you being elected president, the second time a woman president in your country, which none of the other countries in the region, not even in the European Union, have had. I think you are a living proof of the modern fact that so many people and also so many women have in Kosovo. So my question would be, tell us a bit more about the achievements, especially of women in your country, because I think it's necessary that we all know more, and I mean, you probably all know a lot, but it's important to show that to the public. And maybe just one comment to you, Mr. Brix, because you said it's the right-wing politics they're against. It's not just that. It's France and Netherlands, as we know, who are blocking visa liberalization, and that is liberal presidents and prime ministers. So I think it's up to all sort of center also parties to really push them to talk about the modern opportunities that Kosovo has for all of us in Europe, and not always talk about the negative images. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrike. I certainly agree. And that's why I said at the beginning that it's been 22 years after the war. And yes, we went through hell, but today Kosovo is a vibrant, modern society with some brilliant young minds who are excelling everywhere they go. And they are achieving so many successes because they are having the opportunities. And the lack of visa liberalization is blocking these opportunities and this huge potential that the people of Kosovo have right now. I think it's very important that you mentioned that our society has shown this great level of emancipation when it comes to gender equality in the latest election, not just because I got the highest support amount of votes in Kosovo's history, but mostly because of the very high number of women elected to the parliament directly, without the help of the quota, and also quite a good number of women in the government. Politics alone, however, the representation of women in politics, although a great success in these past elections, should not make us, just stay idle and say everything is perfect, because we need to use these positions and these opportunities to deal with the daily most acute problems for women in our country, especially economic empowerment, because once that happens, obviously, as independent economically, they can deal with so many of the other problems of inequality which exist in any other country as well, not just in Kosovo, but we must tackle them, because I strongly believe that including women in the workforce is not just the good thing to do morally, but it's also the good thing to do commercially speaking. It's also the smart thing to do, because by including them in the workforce, you're giving more opportunities for economic development and a higher, of course, effort when it comes to GDP and other areas of development. So in terms of political representation, it's absolutely something that we can be proud of. Over 60% of the electoral vote for our joint list came from women, which meant that women were the ones leading for change in our country. And that is a fact that must be recognized also in our policies, in the policy making every single day, in the decisions of the government and the other institutions. Because what I've learned in politics, and I've been in the institutions for quite some time and in a political party until recently, it is that for men, it is extremely hard for them to change their political party. They're so connected to the acronym. For the women, it's about the quality of life. It's about the people. So when they think about who to vote, they think about who offers more quality education for the kids, who offers more quality healthcare for the elderly in the family, who offers a better perspective for their grandchildren. That's where their vote is going, not to the acronym, but to the opportunity for the people. And that's why they led the change, together with our great diaspora, obviously. That's why they led the change in these latest elections, giving an excellent example on how the people's vote truly matters. And right now, with institutions that are really committed to rule of law, that are undertaking great decisions every single day in this area, and that, of course, as a precondition and as an effort to convince foreign investors, but also to help domestic businesses flourish, I think shows that there's a bright future that is ahead, but at the same time shows that the international community has a credible partner, a reliable partner, and an ally in Kosovo that truly believes in democratic values and believes that when you really carry out the promises that you made to the people and you deal with their daily problems, a country can truly develop, and there can be hope, and that hope can turn into concrete perspective for this youth. And then, yeah, they don't see no reason to look at that perspective elsewhere, but then they come to Austria to do, let's say, their masters, or just to visit Vienna for an engagement proposal, or for tourism prospects. And then they always come back, like I did, and like all of my colleagues did. Artan studied here in Austria. Donieta lived for 23 and a half years in London, and then came back to Kosovo, and Learta studied in Budapest. They all came back to bring, and I came back from the United States. We all came back to give something to our country, to give that tiny bit of a contribution, which if there are many and many of us, it becomes an ocean of a contribution to the state building efforts. And the fact that all of these youngsters, and plenty from our diaspora, are now returning, it shows that the potential is there, and that this bright future is really ahead. But obviously we will need great partners by our side, we will need support from our friends, and we will need all of those joint declarations, so many of which have been signed so far, to turn into actual investment from the European Union, be it in digitalization, in the IT sector, or in the green agenda, in connectivity, and so many of the other things that sound really nice, but we really need to see the products of it in practice.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Thank you for this empowerment arguments you used here. I cannot fully agree that it's only women that make decisions on practical grounds in the
That's
voting
not what
booth.
I said.
Oh, well, more or less. My own feeling is from politics that women tend to be more conservative in their voting habits than men. But
not in Kosovo.
Not in Kosovo, okay.
Not in Kosovo.
So you see, we can learn from Kosovo a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that was our impression in the latest elections, but obviously no change can happen without including both men and women. You can never leave a certain part of your society behind or outside of decision-making. Otherwise, you can't really pretend to have a healthy society if you either exclude men or women, young or old. It's very important that all are represented in decision-making.
Yeah. It's almost the final words, but I have still questions, if I may, Madam President, from here.
Sure.
2 questions, please. What is done or will be done to improve inter-community relations in Mitrovica? I specifically mean measures which do not need the cooperation of the Serbian government. The second question is, why is there no student from Kosovo here at the Academy? Not that I know of, after having been here for 1 year to be certain. Thank you and best regards. So they want, that's a question to me actually, they want to have more.
I think the second is for you.
Please, Madam President.
But let me answer the first. I think it's a very important topic, and that's why I said at the beginning that the dialogue should be also about talking to the Serbs that live in Kosovo, not only talking to Serbia about the Serbs in Kosovo. They are our citizens. We have to talk to them, we have to listen to their concerns. And, you know, most of them are very much similar to the concerns of Albanians, Turks, Bosnians, and others. They relate to unemployment or other problems that everyone in Kosovo is facing, no matter their ethnicity. So we need to have a much stronger communication and a higher level of communication with all of the citizens of Mitrovica, including the Serbs, not just Mitrovica, but all of the northern municipalities. To be very frank, they are not afraid of me. They are afraid of some structures, illegal structures that were created and supported by the Serb government. And they have been creating quite a lot of security problems, especially for the Serbs living in the north. So for that reason, we need to offer them security, we need to offer them a perspective and a chance so that they can prosper and flourish in Kosovo, as did many Serb citizens in the other municipalities. So the more we talk, I think, the more this communication would lead to better results. We should never count or only expect what's happening in Brussels to bring us closer to the citizens we represent. They are our citizens, and we should not wait for anyone to tell us how to talk to them and how to treat their problems. We should make them feel comfortable around their president, around their prime minister, or other representatives. Because in this way, although, of course, we have to be patient, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's a process that needs to be done, always keeping in mind that multi-ethnicity is one of the values based on which Kosovo's constitution and our state has been built on. It's about connecting, it's about talking, it's about removing the barriers with which they are faced every day. It's mostly about creating new jobs, I would say. And that is also one of the ways to remove political barriers or any kind of other barriers that one might feel that there is out there before integration happens. So I see these kind of measures, people-to-people connections, as the way forward, coupled with important EU investment in that part of Kosovo and everywhere, of course, but especially in Mitrovica, because it's a city that for pure political reasons has been left aside quite a lot when it comes to investment.
Yeah. The tricky side in ethnic conflicts is always administration. How can you integrate both ethnic sides into local administration? Is there anything that you can do and offer to the Serb population in parts of your country?
Well, we can offer them everything that our constitution provides, which is all of the human rights that are provided there, economic rights, and Kosovo has offered in its constitution the highest level of minority rights compared to any other country in Europe. So I think this should never be seen as a territorial issue. It should be seen as a human rights and representation issue. And they are represented with guaranteed seats both at the national level as well as the local level. I think what has lacked has been lots of communication, as I mentioned at the beginning. And I think even the Serb politicians that are elected need to understand that their main job is to represent their electors, the Serb community living in Kosovo, and not the wishes of Vučić. Because if they continue to do that, I think they will only work to the detriment of the Serb people who are living in Kosovo.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I still have some questions, but I think we covered most of them. There was this one question regarding me. Sorry, yes, I will. But one question about Akademie. Will you answer to this, or should I? Okay, so I will answer the question. We would be happy to have students from Kosovo, and we used to have actually regularly. And we are working now in a project with the Pristina University actually on helping to modernize the structure of the philosophical faculty of the University of Pristina, which my deputy is heading this project. So Excellent. There is a close cooperation, but you know, one of the problems is, and that our foreign minister said also last week, that we must make sure that all Western Balkan countries are fully integrated into the Horizon Europe program, into all the educational exchange programs, and this we still have not yet arrived. There is still a chance, and Austria is arguing for this. This would help us for this educational exchange, but
Excellent.
I should not be the one answering. Please.
Thank you, Madam President. You mentioned the role of diaspora just in the context of the elections. Thank you very much. And I wonder, would you kindly elaborate how you cooperate with your diaspora worldwide in achieving the aims you just explained to us? Recognition by non-recognizers, visa liberalization, investments, exchange in education sector, and many other topics.
Thank you. There's this long history of Kosovo's diaspora being extremely engaged in making Kosovo's voice heard. During the 90s, when we had no embassies because we did not have the recognitions and diplomatic relations as a precondition to that, it was our diaspora that was organizing all of the meetings and was leading the lobbying in favor of Kosovo, be it at the US Congress or at the White House or at 10 Downing Street, or here in Austria and Germany. It was them that made sure that we had a voice and that we had meetings and doors opened for our political leaders in all of these capitals. The role now is twofold. Now, of course, we have our embassies, but that doesn't mean that the voice of our diaspora is any less important in increasing the opportunities for Kosovo. But now the relations are also directed towards convincing members of our diaspora who are already very successful economically in countries where they live to invest in their home country in Kosovo. So this is one side, and the other thing is the brain gain process, because there have been so many that went to Western countries to study and they stayed there. It's very important that they now see opportunities how to help their country and their institutions, either in the public sector or even in the private sector, because recently we've visited some companies in the ICT sector and they came back all the way from the United States and now they are extremely successful in Kosovo in many areas. So there are plenty of opportunities where the voice of the contribution that the diaspora can give should go way beyond the remittances, because right now the remittances or direct contribution to families and to Kosovo's market is as large as Kosovo's budget, yearly budget. It's very large, so we are absolutely grateful for that, but they should be seen as a potential beyond the remittances by having diaspora businesses invest, therefore create new jobs, and at the same time have this brain gain so that many of them can come and contribute, especially to the necessary reforms that Kosovo will have to undergo. Is something that cannot happen overnight, obviously. Networking, connections, getting to know the people and convincing them that this is the momentum, this is the right time for them to return or invest or even collaborate from where they are abroad is sometimes a process that takes some time, but not always, because they have always been so eager to contribute to Kosovo and do everything for their home country, because as you know, most of them fled either during the war or during the apartheid-like system years in the 90s for economic and political reasons and because of the aggression. Of course, now they are very successful in the countries where they live, but it's very important that they see a true opportunity when they help their country. So we're working together with societies through our embassies in many cases, and we are very much confident that we will be able to strengthen these relations in the months and years to come.
Madam President, we went a long way actually from necessary but not satisfactory discussion about Serbia to the future of Kosovo. And that's what you're here for. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. In one of the Austrian newspapers, that was recently the title about your election, it says, rising like a phoenix from the clique of white old men. I apologize
kind
for
of very last minute.
but I thank you. You were inspiring also for us here, and we wish you certainly all the best for that. And
Thank you so
I have to
much.
close with someone on the internet, because I couldn't pronounce it better. It says, "We are lucky to have you now. It's a new page for us."
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much to all of you and everyone watching online. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.